Welcome in another edition of the Blue White Breakdown, brought to you by Penn State Health. Indiana week here for the Penn State Nittany Lions. He's Daniel Gallen. I'm Dustin Hockensmith. We'll talk about this matchup coming up with the Hoosiers. We'll also look back here in a moment. News items from the past couple days, just to catch you up on that. We have a nationally televised showdown featuring some Penn State commits. That's coming up on Friday night. And we'll get into our position series looking at recruiting, and an interesting one at the wide receiver position. You all know what those top guys are doing now, but I think we're going to look a little bit below the surface, including the number of high profile commits so far in the 2022 class. So Dan, you ready to rock and roll? Ready for week 5 of the Penn State season?
Yeah, let's go, Dustin. We're in prime time again this week, so got to get the energy up to match.
And keep it up for a long period of time into Saturday night and Sunday morning. So that'll be the challenge. 2 times out of 3 weeks. So one of the things as we sit here today, I think a little resolution for many of the situation with Hakeem Beamon. James Franklin said on Wednesday, just use the term unavailable. So we don't really know, I guess, the nature of the situation. We have seen him working on scout teams, so it does not appear to be a physical thing. But we do know the exact situation there, defensive tackle. No more waiting for Hakeem Beamon to be back.
Yeah, and that was kind of what James Franklin said last night, where he goes, yeah, now you don't have to ask me every week whether or not Hakeem Beamon is going to be available. But it's definitely interesting. He's a redshirt sophomore, third-year guy who some were expecting to compete for a spot on the two deep, potentially a starter. We all know what Penn State lost after last season and into this season. Top 4 defensive ends, a starting defensive tackle. There are plenty of opportunities for a guy who'd been in the program for a couple of years, like Beamon, to step in and get a role. And for whatever reason, that didn't really happen. A couple of weeks ago, he was a developmental squad player of the week. So he is doing some things behind the scenes that, the team likes, but, we're not going to see him on the field on Saturdays this year.
And I think the follow up with that is, to me, it just takes time and experience to get somebody on the cusp of making an impact at that position. And I think that's one of the things that Hakeem Beamon had kind of gone through that process. He had made a tackle for loss. I think he had shown some explosiveness and some unique dimensions at that position last year. So a lot of people were understandably excited about his future. And I don't know that, you can still be excited about his future. That's just his 2022. They're just going through this process now of getting other guys on the cusp of making an impact. And we've seen some of them, including last week against Villanova, some players to be excited about. But I think one of the players that has maybe picked up the slack that we were expecting from Hakeem Beamon is Devon Ellis playing a little bit more than we expected. And, if you hear these guys talking about him, including PJ Mustipher, some good reason to be excited about him too.
Yeah, Devon Ellis was, I think, one of the more surprising faces that we saw on the field at Wisconsin in week 1. Right off the jump, he's getting a lot of run behind PJ Mustipher and Derek Tangelo on that interior. And when you kind of look at what Penn State has there, it's not really a surprise if you just kind of go by, seniority and, talent level. There's a veteran guy in there like Fred Hansard, but, Hakeem Beamon and Devon Ellis were kind of in that third year. They've had that time to get ready. It's kind of that time where you expect them to make an impact because the guys behind them, PJ Mustipher singled out Amin Vanover, Fatorma Molba, and Keziah Izzard. Those guys are all second-year guys, redshirt freshmen. So, there's talent there, but at that position, which is so physically demanding and also technical, I think that you kind of have to have some seasoning and some time in the program before you can really, step into a role right there.
That seasoning's happening whenever Penn State gets opportunities to play, to go a little deeper into their rotations, these guys. And, Amin Vanover is a unique athlete. Fatorma Molba, probably one of the strongest pound for pound players on this entire roster. I think they're excited about that. And, John Scott, I had seen, was giving some compliments to these guys. And he said about Keziah Izzard, he thinks he can be a great, great player. I think the future is really bright for, all 3 of those guys, but especially Keziah Izzard. And, all these guys are kind of a product of Penn State got hot at the defensive tackle position on the recruiting front and has loaded up on a bunch of young guys. And this right now, the time we're in, is them trying to get them up to speed, maybe to make an impact next year. Speaking of next year, 2022, the commits that we are going to see on national television. Drew Aller, his stock continues to rise. A lot of people are getting familiar with him, not just in the Penn State and Big Ten community, but on the national scene as well. Will be competing Friday night, 7 p.m. Andre Roy, one of the newest commits, also on display coming up. What do you know about these guys and getting that run? I'm sure as a high school player, just super cool to be on national TV.
Yeah, so Drew Aller and Medina High School are going to be on ESPN2 at 7 p.m. on Friday night, going against Mentor, which is another kind of big time Ohio program. Mentor has its own star to keep an eye on, a 2023 five-star defensive lineman named Brennan Vernon, who's committed to Notre Dame. So there's going to be some high level talent there. Drew Aller has just had such a great start to the season. I got his updated stats this morning, and he has 20 touchdowns to 3 interceptions. And I think he's leading his team in rushing right now, which is just pretty wild. He's really put it all together, as one of those guys who is only going to rise up the recruiting rankings. So that'll be pretty kind of, exciting to get a look at these guys, in a game environment, not really filtered through huddle or something like that. You get to see the good, the bad, the ups, the downs instead of just the highlights, even though highlights are pretty fun to watch sometimes. And then at 10 o'clock, after the Medina Mentor game, St. Francis from Baltimore is facing De La Salle in California. Andre Roy is the 3-star offensive tackle who committed to Penn State last week. He projects as kind of one of those, he's just one of those big bodies that you want to bring in, has physical tools, and then you want to see what offensive line coach Phil Troutwine can do in kind of molding him into a contributor. And I think that that's kind of the strategy along the offensive line. You look at some of the guys that Penn State has in this class, like Malik McNeil, who I think is 6'8", something, mid 300 pounds. I saw part of his highlight tape where he's punting for his high school and then, is making tackles on runbacks. It's, I think those are the guys you want to bring them in and then, kind of have the clay, and then you let Phil Troutwine, or the offensive staff really mold them into things. So Andre Roy and St. Francis will be playing at 10. St. Francis also has a 4-star linebacker, Jayshawn Barham, who Penn State is also potentially in the mix for. Obviously, space is tight. All these spots are crucial, but that's another name to know. And then just in general, St. Francis has 5 of the top 6 players in Maryland in the 24/7 sports composite rankings for the class of 2022. So that's a school that always has the talent. They don't play the Baltimore private schools anymore. They play a national schedule. So, they're always interesting to watch.
Now, a couple themes for our next topic are present here. Number one, space being tight in the 22 class. We're not sure exactly what the number is, but they're pushing close to it now. Also, the idea of premium physical tools. Both of those things come together. You mentioned it for Andre Roy, who's like 6'6", 320, Malik McNeil. Some of these things that you just can't teach. Target, who will be announcing October 2nd, game day for Penn State. Amari Evans from Texas. He's a 3-star player, not very highly touted on a national level. But one thing that really jumps out is he's supposed to run in the 4.3s in the 40-yard dash. And that right there might be a good beginning point as to why Penn State might feel strong enough about Amari Evans to potentially take him. And it looks like they sit in pretty good position here going into the weekend.
Yeah, I think 24/7 Sports reported that Evans ran, I think, those 4.36 at a TCU camp earlier this summer. And that's a number that just jumps off the page to you. I mean, Jahan Dotson said that he ran, I think, 4.33. So that's the kind of speed that you're talking about. It's the vertical threat. Penn State hasn't necessarily had those guys in recent years. Obviously Dotson has kind of grown into someone who can take the top off the defense, but that's not necessarily what you want his main role to be. Parker Washington obviously is kind of make plays with ball in his hands. And then, we're still kind of seeing Keandre Lambert-Smith's development come along. So Penn State hasn't really had that burner that you put on the outside that commands his safety over the top to kind of open up the middle for the tight ends and stuff. So I think that you look at Omari Evans, 3-star from Texas. Doesn't have a lot of interest from Texas schools. Rutgers is also in the mix for him. So it'll be interesting to kind of see how that shakes out. But, when you just look at the speed, it's kind of like, oh, yeah, like, of course, this is what you would want on your offense. This is what you want to add to your team.
And obviously, Penn State not super concerned about what those star ratings say or national rankings say. They seem to have a beat on this kid and like him. So we'll see if that ends up being the third game day in a row where Penn State gets a commitment. It's becoming a thing now, Daniel.
Oh yeah, we had Matthias Mega Barnwell, the 6'5", 270-pound tight end from Northern Virginia, commit to Penn State last Saturday before the Villanova game. That was one that you weren't really expecting. There wasn't a ton out there, but it's interesting. He was the first commit in the class of 2023 in June 2020. Decommitted in January, and he comes back into the mix despite getting some interest from Ohio State, Notre Dame. Pretty impressive offer list for him. So, Penn State now has 3 commits in the class of 2023. 2 of them are from Northern Virginia with Barnwell, and then Alex Birchmeyer, the interior offensive lineman, who's a 5-star recruit in the composite rankings. So, that's an area. Trace McSorley's from Northern Virginia. Brandon Polk was from Northern Virginia. There's been other guys from that area who've made the trip up here, and so I think that's a good area to mine. And Penn State has done that really well, and that's continuing into 2023 as the calendar keeps going.
It never stops. The recruiting calendar never ever stops, Daniel. And 23 class. I can think of in all the years that I've been following along with Penn State recruiting, and I think probably on a national level it's extremely rare too. The decommit and recommit is not a common move. I can only think of 2, and one's Mega Barnwell and one is Micah Parsons. So that's pretty good company too if things play out that way. And I'll be interested. We're not really talking too much about Mega Barnwell here, but we will in the future. 6'5", 270 right now. Will he be a tight end, or will he be maybe an offensive tackle by the time he gets ready to make his college debut? We'll see about that. That frame is growing in a hurry from the time he committed to the time he recommitted. So that's one to keep an eye on. We talked about Omari Evans. Just looking at the wide receiver position, interesting place for Penn State right now. And, for a couple reasons. One, obviously, Jahan Dotson and Parker Washington are doing their thing. Parker Washington comes off a huge day. Jahan Dotson is Jahan Dotson. What they've done at that position, I tend to think of wide receivers as one of 2 usually. You're either the small burner or you're the 6'3", 220 guy. Penn State has settled into, in a lot of ways, kind of right in between those 2 prototypes where they've got guys who are physical, like Parker Washington is a running back. He might as well be. Jahan Dotson, you don't need to be 220 pounds, and he's another example of that. So they've done a good job of busting the prototype. They don't really even have a type anymore. But what they've got is a lot of players in that pipeline. And beyond those 2 players, we just don't know a ton about some of these young guys. We don't know a lot about Malik Mega, outstanding physical talent. And Penn State has given us some breadcrumbs to think that he's developing behind the scenes. Jaden Dotton is another one. We haven't seen Norval Black. Liam Clifford and Trey Wallace are coming along. They're true freshmen that Penn State really seems to like. We don't know what that next chapter looks like, but we do know that next chapter includes a huge group of guys in the 22 class.
Yeah, definitely. I think that you look at the top 3 that Penn State has right now, really hard to argue with it, with Dotson, Washington, and Lambert-Smith. But if one of those guys gets banged up, and even when you look at when they were spelling guys, Winston Eubanks saw the field really early against Wisconsin. We've seen Cam Sullivan Brown as kind of like that first guy in. And it's kind of like there's just a lot of questions. You were kind of hoping maybe through the Villanova game that you'd see some of these younger guys get some run, and show what they can do. So, you haven't really seen that. So there are some questions. Jaden Dotton and Malik Mega, are kind of I think what we talked about with like the type of wide receivers. I think they're regarded as kind of 2 of the bigger body type guys that Penn State doesn't really have, that's not in their top three right now. But when you project it into next year, Caden Saunders, Anthony Ivy, Tyler Johnson, those are your pure wide receivers in the class. And then you have Mekhi Flowers, Christian Driver, two other guys that, could play wide receiver, or at least want to play wide receiver, could also be safeties. There's just kind of, you have, possibilities with them. So it's a lot of guys to bring in. But when you kind of look at the depth chart, there's going to be some attrition, and you kind of need this many bodies at that position. You need to take as many shots as you can, because, even when you look at this year, you've got three proven definite guys who can go out there and produce week in and week out. And in today's college football, that doesn't really seem like enough. Obviously, Penn State has a deep tight end room, which kind of helps there a little bit, and the way that they, line up Theo Johnson, Tyler Warren, Bretton Strange. But just from a purely, number standpoint, you're kind of like, oh, this is a lot of wide receivers in the class. Are we sure they need this many? But then when you look at it, it's, like, oh, okay. They need to hit on some of these guys.
So I think if all goes to plan, obviously the top three will be the top three for the remainder of this season. You forecast out to 2022, it's hard to believe that Jahan Dotson would be back for more. He's already come back for more once. I don't expect it to happen again. Certainly with the way things are going, we can count him as good as being gone to the NFL. The only issue being where will he go in the draft? So, but I think within that top three, we've seen enough, I think, from Parker Washington to say, okay, I think he'd be an adequate number one if that's where things are going. I think we've seen in flashes with Keandre Lambert-Smith. Maybe I think there's a trajectory for him to be a good number two if things keep progressing though. So I think they're okay there. But then behind those guys, which is the nature of this conversation, I think the youth movement thing is probably going to happen next year. I think Harrison Wallace and Liam Clifford have shown enough from what it seems to the coaching staff that they will be trustworthy next year. And then this group that's coming in, at least one of these guys, like it would surprise me if at least one of these guys do not burn their red shirts as true freshmen. And Caden Saunders is at the top of that list for me just because of quickness, speed, and his ability to get off the line of scrimmage. I think that would be a really good asset. It's sort of like Parker Washington in that regard. He's not as big as Parker Washington. He has been compared to KJ Hamler by the Penn State coaching staff in the past. So that might be a good indication of where he's at. But you're going to see some young guys. It hasn't happened for Cam Sullivan-Brown, not yet. It hasn't happened for Daniel George. I think the time could be maybe not now, but maybe the second half of this year and the early part of next year where these young guys get some run.
Yeah, I think that when you look at the guys that are coming in and the opportunity to contribute right away, Caden Saunders is, definitely top of the list, just because of the type of wide receiver that he is. He's more of a slot guy. I assume that he has the speed, from watching his highlights. You can tell that there's speed. So if you need to put him on the outside, run straight as fast as you can, it's something you can add to the offense. But, he seems like the type of wide receiver that a guy like Mike Yursich is going to want to get involved. Put him in the slot, move him around the formation, get him the ball in space, which has been a big theme of this offense so far this year. So you can really kind of see how he would fit in there and how he has the potential to really make things happen. Some of the other guys might need a little bit of seasoning, depending on how physically ready they are when they come in. But, I think Penn State, given how you see the top three performing right now, that, Penn State has the track record of being able to develop these guys.
Mekhi Flowers, we'll see safety or wide receiver. Christian Driver, same conversation. Christian Driver, the son of Donald Driver, has said, I believe he prefers to play wide receiver at the next position. I was on board with him looking like a better fit at safety. Mekhi Flowers can also play there. So we'll see. I mean, it's a good problem, so to speak, to have to have a bunch of 6'1", 180-pound guys who look like they can make the grade on both sides of the ball. That's a good spot for James Franklin. But we'll see. I mean, there's a lot of unknowns yet at this wide receiver position, but a lot of good talent that's coming along. So it'll be fun to watch that moving forward. Let's bring the focus back, Daniel, just to the matchup at hand here. Penn State, Indiana. Don't call it a revenge game. That's a PJ Mustipher. Just speaking to the professionalism that they're trying to present, it's not about last year. We're not carrying that with us. We're a different team now with a different outlook on a different team. But I think the feeling of wanting to get these guys back is there. It's there for the fans. It's a 7:30 p.m. kick. There will be some energy in that place. I think everybody wants this just because of not just losing, but because of what happened afterwards. The downward spiral, so to speak. They're going to want this game, and Vegas is looking at this thing preseason 5.5 point spread for this one, and I liked Indiana at that point. But since then, that opened at 11.5. The last I looked on Wednesday was at 13.5.
Oh,
So a lot of people seem to think that Penn State's going to run away with this one. We've seen Indiana play these guys tough before, but it looks like a situation where if Michael Penix Jr. isn't that special dynamic quarterback, if Freifogel isn't taking the lid off the Penn State defense, there's a real shot here, I think, for Penn State to cover that spread.
yeah, definitely. I think that one thing that you look at with Michael Penix is the performance against Iowa and the performance against Cincinnati, where he just had some shaky throws. Obviously, the Iowa game got out of hand pretty spectacularly with the 2 pick sixes, and just kind of a very disjointed performance by Indiana. And so, I think that Indiana is a team that is probably somewhere in between how they performed in their wins and how they performed in that loss to Iowa. I think the Cincinnati game was close going into the second half. So Indiana's going to play, them tough. I think for them, last year was kind of the perfect storm for them to kind of take that big step forward and be in that national conversation. It was the COVID year. They got off, it's kind of like Penn State, how different does their season look if that week one result flips? There could be a completely different conversation. But, I think Michael Penix is one of the keys to the game. If he's the same guy that he was before his knee injury, if he's still kind of working his way back, that's something that you want to watch because, he's a guy that hurt you with his arm, hurt you with his legs. And I think Penn State did a good job keeping Bo Nix in check, someone that can do something kind of similar. So it'll be interesting to see how that can continue with Penix.
It's obviously a key matchup in this one is not only pressuring him and trying to force him into some mistakes without allowing him to do damage with his leg. So that's the conundrum for this Penn State front seven. You've seen him be mistake prone this year more so than last year. I don't know that I expect him to go into a night environment on the road at Beaver Stadium and flip the script, but it's always a threat and it's always a possibility. But I think the difference this year is a couple things. He's not as crisp, understandably so. Penn State's defense is creating more pressure than it did last year, and it's stickier in coverage than last year. And one thing that Michael Penix does not do is throw the ball with a great deal of accuracy. Ball placement is not a real strength for him. He's got plenty of arm strength. He can get it there, but I think sometimes just not always exactly on target. There will be a threat here for a pick six. There will be a threat for maybe multiple takeaways. This Penn State defense is hungry for those. You just got to kind of not let him do damage by making plays with his legs, and we'll see what happens there. On the offensive side, I think everybody's looking for progress in the run game. I don't tend to panic as much as some fans seem to be panicking about the run game dynamic because they've executed so well in the short passing game. It's almost an extension of the running game in some ways. But what are you expecting from the Penn State offense going against this Hoosiers defense?
Yeah, the Indiana defense plays the run well. So those yards are going to be hard to come by up the middle again. But, I think that it's just kind of getting guys into space. If you can get your running backs to the edge, if you can get the ball out to Jahan Dotson, Parker Washington on the edge in space, let them make plays. The running game is interesting. I'm kind of like you. Like, I'm not too worried about it. As long as you're moving the ball up the field. I do kind of wonder when you get into the 4-minute offense situation, can Noah Kane, can Kevon Lee, can John Lovett, can they really, get you 3 yards, 3 yards, 4 yards, 3 yards to kind of, keep the chains moving, keep the clock moving. Penn State hasn't had to do that yet, really. So that's something that you're still kind of waiting to see if it's there. And I think that it's kind of one of those things where might not be a problem until it's actually a problem. So that'll
Right.
be something to watch. But I think the Penn State offense, I think just going to keep doing what they've been doing. I think it'll be interesting to see if there are any new wrinkles out there. Even against Villanova, they went back to the Tyler Warren package at the goal line, which I wasn't really expecting to see, in the FCS game. But that's still there. Who knows what else they have in it? Who knows what other kind of wrinkles we're going to see? Maybe one of the wide receivers that we talked about earlier is not really producing. Maybe there's something, maybe they're a guy who steps up this week. So, I think the Penn State offense, it's been clicking. And so it's kind of hard to go against that right now.
Yeah, I think just the athleticism, the speed and space, that advantage is going to be present there again. And Indiana is better talent wise, but they're going to be looking to do the same thing that your Ball State was doing, that Villanova was doing. Let's just try to keep containment the best we can, keep everything in front of them, and try to force Penn State to drive the field. And they've been pretty successful doing it, especially without the running game, which is affects the consistency. I think it puts them in less than ideal situations in terms of second and longs and third and longs a little bit too often. So that's something that needs to change. But the formula's been working so far. I expect it to work again. We have similar picks on this one. You've got a 31-17 Penn State. I've got 37-17. I think they're going to do a little bit more scoring than that. So we'll see what happens. 7:30 p.m. at Beaver Stadium Saturday night. Penn State, Indiana, ABC, I believe, kickoff there. So, as Daniel Gallen, I'm Dustin Hockensmith. This has been another edition of the Blue White Breakdown. Every Friday, we'll be talking Penn State football, Penn State recruiting. You can follow Daniel on Twitter at DanielJT As always, you can check out everything we do, writing, video, podcasts, PennLive.com/Penn State football. And lastly, you can locate all of our Blue White Breakdown podcasts on Alexa, Apple, Google, Spotify, Stitcher, and on YouTube as well. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time on the Blue White Breakdown.